Hello, we're going to look at the multiplication property of equality. And again, this relates to solving equations, figuring out what is the value of a variable. So let's take a look at some examples, and that will also help us to understand this definition a bit more. So it'll say solve for x. And so we're going to have 3x equals negative 39. So it means that we need to do something there that can help us to get x all by itself. Our goal is to have x equals some number at the end. And right now there's a 3 attached to it. So we need to know, how can I get rid of that 3? Now, anytime there is a number next to something, just connected to it, it means that it's multiplied. And so we need to be able to undo that multiplication. And again, what we do to one side, we have to do to the other because we have the equal sign. And so we have to maintain that balance. Now, here we can do a couple different things. We could multiply by its multiplicative inverse. In this case, I can multiply that 3x by 1/3 and be able to get x by itself. However, I can also think of it in terms of doing the opposite operation that's there. And so 3 times x, the opposite operation of times would be divide. So I'm going to divide by 3, but again, I have to do it to both sides. 3 divided by 3 is 1x, right? And then we have to divide negative 39 divided by 3 is going to give us 13, but don't forget negative divided by a positive is going to give us a negative, so negative 13. And again, we can write it as 1x equals negative 13 or leave the 1 out. It's implied when there's not a coefficient in front of the x. Next example, negative x over 3 equals 2. And again, this looks like a fraction, but we also have to remember what a fraction bar means, and it means divide. So first and foremost, when we have divide, the opposite operation would be to multiply. So if I want to get rid of divide 3, I'm going to multiply by 3. But I also have a negative there, so I'm going to multiply by a negative 3. And so if I have negative 3 times negative 1/3, that will give me 1. So let's take a look. I have negative 3, and then it's over 1, and I'm going to multiply that by x over 3. So here's what happens is then I have negative 3 times a negative x over 1 times 3. 2 negatives make a positive. 3 times x is 3x. And then 1 times 3 is 3. When I go to simplify this, the 3's divide out to 1, leaving me with the x. Okay. All right, so let's continue our voyage on this problem to figure out what x is equal to. Multiplied by negative 3, so we have x here, and then on the other side, 2 times a negative 3 is a negative 6. And again, we can check our answer. We have negative, and then x is negative 6 divided by 3. We're seeing if that indeed is equal to 2. Double negatives become positive. 6 divided by 3 is 2. We get 2 equals 2. We're good. Next problem. 12x over 5 equals 18. Okay, so first things first, we see that the x and the 12 are connected with multiplication, but we have a fraction bar, which means division. So let's undo the division. So we would multiply both sides by 5. And so again, just like we did on the last problem, we would see that the 5's cancel out. We're left with 12x this time on that side. And then we have to figure out what 18 times 5 is. That gives us 90. And now we have a second step here because we have 12 times x. So to undo multiplication, we're going to divide each side by 12. And then we have to figure out what 90 divided by 12 is. And that gives us 7.5 or 7.5. All right, last example. This one's a written one. 2/3 of a number is -6. Find the number. So first we need to translate this into an actual equation. And so let's take a look at this piece by piece. So it says 2/3 of a number. We don't know what the number is. And so we will give it a name. We'll just give it n. So 2/3. So to write 2/3, it's a fraction of a number. And then the next part says is -6. So is meaning equal -6. Okay, and now it asks us to find the number. So 2/3 is times n. So to undo that, we're going to divide by 2/3 on both sides. 2/3 divided by 2/3. Remember, anything divided by itself is 1. So we have n on the left side. Now on the right side, we have to remind ourselves, how do I divide fractions? And so let's give us some more room here so we can look at how we're going to divide those fractions. Look at that piece in particular. All right. So in this case, we have -6. And remember, we can write any whole number as a fraction by putting it over 1. And we're dividing that by 2/3. And remember, we don't actually divide. We change it to multiply, but we flip the second fraction. So the first one stays the same, the second one flips. And to multiply fractions, we go straight across. So we have -6 times 3, and then we have 1 times 2 on the bottom. -6 times 3 is a -18. 1 times 2 is 2. And remember that that fraction bar is divide. So -18 divided by 2 gives us a -9. And so n equals -9. Okay. That's it for the video. As you work through the lesson, if you have any questions, make sure to ask your teacher. Have a great day.